end of this year. We're actually at the end of the church year, but we're almost at the end of the calendar year as well. And looking at the way that this service is going, I can't help but notice a couple things that align very similarly. There's a clock up the back, if you've ever taken notice of it before. We're about 10 minutes into the service and we're already at the message, and it feels like this service is flying by. Similarly, it kind of feels like the year has done the same. I'm looking back at all of the things that my year has held, and if you were here last week, you heard my sister speaking about that this time last year, our family was preparing to go overseas. This time last year, I was about to be thrust into the cold of Scotland for about a month in the deepest of their winters. This year, that's not going to happen, but it feels like just yesterday that was where I was. Endings and beginnings is the title of today's sermon. And that's an interesting thing, an interesting order to put them in, because normally we think of, at the start of something, you've got the beginning, and then you move through it, and if you're familiar with the character arc of heroes within stories, normally you start the story and they've got some tragic issue, and then, they've come up against something that they must push through and only they can do it, and then you get, to the highest of highs, and then all of a sudden a twist, and then you're at the end. And that's normally the way that they progress through things. God does that, but God also does this crazy thing that we can't seem to set up, which is create endings to provide us even better beginnings. If you think back on your life, I'm going to use the example of high school for me because it's pretty relatable, and most of the Year 12s are at schoolies at the moment or celebrating their end of their schooling. The end of high school is a moment like that. You've spent your entire life going through school. You go there day in and day out, and you just have to get through it for some people. You sit there and you go, I'm actually really not interested in maths, but, I have to learn it and I have to move through this thing. And you make friends along the way, and then all of a sudden, everything that you know has ended. And for some people, that's really, really exciting. Some people look forward to the end of things because it thrusts them into a new chapter. Some people, like myself, tends to get to the end of things and go, okay, I understand that I need to move on, but I'm a little bit sad about all of the things that I'm leaving behind. There is excitement and sadness at the end of something that you have known for so long, something that you are so familiar with. Endings challenge us. They push us to the end of our comfort zone and then further, but they are a natural part of God's plan. If each of us got to the end of high school and went, well, this is my comfort zone, this is all that I know, and I understand that the time has come for it to end, but I refuse to let go of it, we would never find any of the other things waiting for us in our lives. We would never find the excitement of going into a job that you love. You wouldn't go into the excitement of meeting a partner, starting a family. Yet, it is easy to look back on those times that we spent in such comfort. Sorry, I'm distracted by that because Geordie's just zoomed in on only my face. And I'm uncomfortable with the ending of me being able to see my whole body on the screen. We get to the end. See, I've now lost my place, which is totally fine because God's got this. God knows where I'm going with this. The Israelites in the Bible, we see them through their entire journey. And it's really hard to recognize when we get to see the whole picture, just how many parts of that felt like endings. We heard from Psalm 39 today, where they're waiting for the coming Messiah. They're at this point where they've gone through Egypt and they've been exiled and they know that good is coming. They know that it's there somewhere. They feel like they're at the end and that should be there now. But it's not there yet. Yet God says that his throne was established long ago and will go for endless days. We then saw in Samuel where they're talking about the time that is to come and knowing that God has promised good things for them. And it says, if my house was not right with God, which I think is such an interesting statement. If my house was not right with God, if I was not right with God, how could I trust in the everlasting covenant of God's promise? How could I trust in that to endure all time? And then we get to Revelation, which was our third reading for today, which does a bit of a jump. We go from, we're expecting the Messiah to come and arrive, and we know that he is coming because it is promised. And then all of a sudden, God is with us. We jump over that bit in the middle. If any of you are familiar with the ending of the last book of the Old Testament, and depending on the Bible you have, it explains that there was not another biblical text added into the Bible for another 400 years. There were 400 years of silence from God. And that feels like an ending to me. If you were there in that time and you knew that something was coming, and then all of a sudden for 400 years you heard nothing, you could come to expect that, okay, this is the end, and I feel like there's no new beginning. And then all of a sudden you flip the next page and you're in Matthew, and Jesus is being born. It is really hard for us to see what is coming next, because it's not something that we could ever expect to be the next thing. Whether you are a person that looks forward in excitement to the beginning of new things, or feels a bit panicked and looks back on nostalgia with what we knew, there is truth for us in this. The Israelites were excited for the coming of the Messiah, but they did not expect for him to come in such a humble way as a baby that we're going to hear about a lot in the next 4 weeks. They were not expected for this. And because of that, they were panicked and confused. But standing where we are now, it's really easy to look back and go, well, I don't really understand what the panic and confusion was for. We now have Jesus, who loves us and saves us. God asks us to be patient with him, to trust in his promises. He says, well, it's written in Ecclesiastes, that there is a time for everything. There is a time for joy, there is a time for weeping, there is a time for dancing, and a time for mourning. We can find all of those things at the beginning and end of everything. The fear that you feel when you step into a new workplace for the first time. Really exciting to have a new job. There's a whole world of possibility. You don't know anyone though, and that can be terrifying. I think back to the first car that I did have, and now the car that I do have. I feel most of you would probably recognize this if you've ever owned a car. My first car, my sister now drives, so I get to see it a lot, which is really nice, but I loved that car. It was my first taste of freedom, bright yellow and could hold practically nothing, but it was the best thing in the world to me at the time. And then all of a sudden, I got my Ps and my siblings are learning how to drive a car. And my parents were like, hey, this car is no longer yours to drive. We're teaching your siblings how to drive in this car. You need to go out and you need to find a new car. And I was like, oh, that's not my understanding of what was going to happen. I was pretty sure that I had paid for half of this car and I was going to be buying the other half off of you. But okay, I guess I'm finding a new car now. That moment was deeply sad for me. Bright yellow car, amazing. It meant that I never had to actively remember where I had parked it, which got me into trouble shortly after getting my now white car. A few times I park it and be like, yeah, I'm going to the shops. And then I'd exit the shops and I'd look around for the bright yellow car and realize that I had parked a white car in a sea of white cars and had not remembered to look at where it had gone. I was half an hour late to uni once because of that. It was quite embarrassing, to be completely honest. We get used to the situation that we're in. And I now look back in fondness of my car where the radio didn't work and the wipers were a bit dodgy and all of the things that I did to improve it. And now the car that I do have is so much more suited for the life that I have. It is bigger. I've got a Subaru Forester, for those of you interested in the car. Please don't buy it off me, I'm not selling it, it's my favorite. But it's very, very good for moving mass amounts of band gear. Those of you that know me and my friends, we do have to carry that stuff around. And I get messages close to camp that go, hey, Lauren, You know how you have the big car, right? I'm like, yeah, I know how I have the big car. Can you take the drums, please? I'm like, yeah, I can take the drums. Last weekend, I helped a friend move house because of the space that this car affords me. This may seem completely unrelated to my message, but it's not. The yellow car that I did have was wonderful. It was easy to learn in. It was an automatic, so I didn't have to worry about figuring out when to do the clutch while I was learning the road rules. And then I became competent. Then I became good on the road, and I outgrew it. And my parents noticed that. They noticed how good learning in that car had been for me and how useful it would be for my siblings to take that and apply it to their lives. And so I got thrust into, hey, you got to find a car. I did know how to drive manual, but I hadn't practiced it in 2.5 years. And let me tell you, learning while driving on the road out of necessity, terrifying time. But that's what a new beginning is. You step into this space and you get used to it by being in it. God notices us in our comfort zone and how proficiently we are moving in it. And then it is time for us to move to something new. That is how we grow. Sometimes we can't recognize it when it's happening. They didn't recognize it at the end of the Old Testament, that Jesus was coming, that the birth of a baby was going to be the thing that saves us all. Endings can feel like closed doors. Jesus' birth reminds us that God can still flood the darkest of times with light. God's eternal faithfulness and promise to us leads us from endings to beginnings. During this time of Advent, I encourage you to look at all of the things that this year has held for you and your family and your loved ones. All of the struggles, all of the amazing moments of support, all of the brand new things that you've gotten to start. And I invite you to surrender to God's plan for the next year, for the coming months, to trust in His faithfulness to us. Through Christ, all things lead to new beginnings. Reflect and grow in these things, and look for your opportunity to share God's love with other people. We are now going to move into a